أشراف مطلوب وطالبه لله أكرام من يمشي على قدم. العلم نور مبين يستضيء به أهل السعادات والجهال في الظلم.
Then the Shaykh says rahimahullah, وعلى سائر من أفطر القضاء لا غير, and for everyone else that breaks his fast other than these people, they need to do qada, they need to make up their day. For example, والعياذ billah, someone breaks his fast, says, I just couldn't handle it today, breaks his fast. That person needs to make it up after Ramadan. Is it understood? Anyone who eats, drinks, or does anything that breaks your fast, he says, they need to make up that day, and they're blameworthy. They're actually blameworthy. And that is so severe that scholars like Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, they say that he can't even make it up. Can't even make it up. He needs to just make tawbah, repent, and do a lot of sunnah fasting, voluntary fasting from there onwards. Because any wajib that is intentionally taken out of its time, he says, can never be repaid. The same goes for salah. If a person intentionally delays the salah, scholars like Shaykh al-Islam say, no, it's not accepted for him to pray again. Like in the majority of the scholars say, it is wajib, it is obligatory for him to repeat that salah or that fast, and he's blameworthy. Lakin, the Shaykh says, إِلَّا مَنْ أَفْطَرَ بِجِمَاعٍ فِي الْفَرْجِ. Soon, inshallah, we're going to study a chapter called Things That Nullify the Fasting. And things that nullify the fasting, they're of two types. They're either food and drink. Food or drink. For that person, the Shaykh already says what? That you make up that day after Ramadan, sah? Lakin he says, إِلَّا مَنْ أَفْطَرَ بِجِمَاعٍ فِي الْفَرْجِ, except a person who does jima', who has intercourse with his wife in Ramadan. For that person, he doesn't only make it up, he's got a lot to answer for. So he says, فَإِنَّهُ يَقْضِي, he has to make up that day that he missed. That's number one. وَيُعْتِقُ رَقَبَةً, and he has to free a slave. And he has to be a mu'min. He has to free a Muslim slave. He has to free a Muslim slave. And he can't go on to the next stage unless he is not able to do this. And how is that possible? For example, he says, I can't find a slave. Today, for example, he says, I can't find a slave. Or he says, I've got money to buy a slave, but it's not enough for the provision that the nafaqah for me and my family, and also spending on that slave. So in that case, he moves on to the next thing, which we're going to see. Like if he has money, enough money to free a slave, and he knows a slave that is a believer, then he frees him. If he can't, then he goes on to the next thing. What about diya? Can he pay diya? Can he, for example, let's say he kills someone. Not him. Let's say there's a person that is due to be killed because of killing someone else. That's qisas, right? So someone is waiting for the court to tell him when he's going to be killed because he killed someone, a third person. Can he say, right, I'm going to pay the diya of this individual? The blood money that he owes, I am going to pay on his behalf. Have you understood the question? قبل أو بعد. قبل or بعد. Doesn't matter. Let's solve it al-masala. For example, Abdullah, or this individual, performed intercourse in the day of Ramadan. What does he have to do? Obviously, he's going to make it up, but he has to free a slave first and foremost. Right? He knows of a person who's awaiting sentencing or who's going to be killed because he killed another person. He doesn't have the diya, and the family might not even accept the diya. The diya is the blood money. Can he now on his behalf say, you know what, that person, they want 100,000 blood money. Let me go pay that blood money, and that is considered تحرير الرقبة, I freed him from being killed. Is that, have you understood? Is that permissible?
ليس بعبد أسلم
ليس به.
يعني هو قاتل نفسه عليه يعني حكم لكن ليس عبدا يملك.
صح, he's not a servant, but they're saying he's actually freeing him. His neck was meant to be killed.
لكن ليس من السلافي.
He's not a slave. Okay, he's not a slave. طيب, anyone else? نعم. أحسنتم. It has to be a slave. It can't be just say I'm gonna. That is تحرير الرقبة when you look at it حقيقة. لكن when you look at it, he's freeing a person from being killed. لكن he's not a slave. طيب. So the first thing is that he frees a slave. If he doesn't, فإن لم يجد, if he doesn't find a slave, فإنه أو فصيام شهرين متتابعين. He fasts 2 consecutive months in succession. If he can't find a slave to free, he must fast 2 days in a row, 2 months in a row. He must. زيادة عن القضاء. نعم. He obviously has to make it up. In all cases, he has to make it up. Like in when now, because the qada, that was the wajib of Ramadan. He has to now do the wajib of the sin. He has to expiate for the sin. If he can't find a slave to free, he needs to fast 2 months in a row. In a row. Now, when it comes to 2 months in a row, if he fasts from the beginning of the month, he says, I'm going to wait for the moon to be sighted. And he starts when the moon is sighted. So tomorrow is, let's say, the 1st of, give me a month, مثلا, the 1st of Muharram. Or let's say the 1st of Dhul Hijjah. The very first day of Dhul Hijjah. He started the month with him because he sighted the moon. In that case, he completes 2 months. So what he does is, he starts the month of Dhul Hijjah, and then, even if the month of Dhul Hijjah ends on 29, the next month is what? Muharram, sah? The very first month. And the moon is sighted after 29 days, he starts the month of Muharram as well. And then if Muharram ends as 29, khalas, 29. Or if it ends as 30, khalas, it's 30. So even if it ends 29, he has fasted 2 months, the full of Dhul Hijjah and Muharram. But he can technically fast 58 days, right? Because each month can be 29 days. So if he starts at the beginning of the month, the months are taken into consideration. Like if he starts halfway through the month, the days are taken into consideration. So if he starts midway through the Hijjah, he has to fast 60 days. Because that is 2 months. Right? Also, what breaks the 60 days, the succession? They have to be in succession. Right? لا, there are reasons that are valid and there are things that are not valid. Okay, لحظة. Excellent. There are things that are valid and things that are not valid. Things that are not valid, for example, he says, listen, I've been fasting for 35 days. Give me a break. I'm going to break my fast. 1 day or 2 days, inshallah, I'm going to carry on. If he does that, he goes back to square one. Even after fasting 35 days, he breaks his fast. He says 2 days rest. Khalas. What he needs to do is what? Carry on. Start from the first day. He needs to fast another 60 days because they have to be in a row. That's one. Also, so that is not justified. If he performs intercourse again during the day in those 2 months, again he's broken his fast. So he restarts the 60 days. However, there are things that don't break that off. For example, if he goes traveling, if he travels and he needs to travel, he's not traveling for the sake of it. He's traveling because he needs to. Then what do we do in this case? He's allowed to break his fast. And when he comes back, if he fasts 35 days, then he needs to travel, Umrah, whatever it may be. And then he comes back, he carries on with 36 days and so on. He carries on like that. Or if he's ill, if he's genuinely ill, khalas, he's allowed to break his fast for the 60 days, break his fast, and then carry on when he's better. Or a woman sees her haid, or menses, because it could be a woman that's making up the 60 days. Sah? Could be a woman. So what happens? Those 60 days, obviously, she's going to have probably 2 menstrual cycles. She has to stop fasting and then carry on from where she left off. Or Eid day comes. Eid day comes, or Ramadan comes. Mathalan, he starts his 2 months in Shawwal. He's fasted the whole, Sha'ban. He fasted the whole of Sha'ban, and then Ramadan follows. He can't obviously fast any other fasting in Ramadan except the obligation of Ramadan. So when Ramadan finishes, he fasts. Like not on Eid day, the day after Eid. Because Eid day it is haram to fast. So that is the tatabu. That is, it has to be fasted in succession. What if a person says, you know, let me just travel for this. Let me pretend like I'm traveling and say I need to go buy something from, I don't know. There's a good bookshop in Birmingham. I'm just going to pretend that I'm going there. And then I'm traveling technically, so I can break my fast. What do we do about him? لكن he's actions are according to this intention, but he's actually worse than the normal person that breaks his fast, because he's trying to trick who? Ihtal. He's trying to trick. طيب, so the shahran, the mutatabi'an, the 2 months that we're meant to follow together, or the person that does that kafara, they're meant to follow them in a row. If something that allows them, the dabit for that is anything that allows you to break your fast in Ramadan allows you to break your fast with the tatabu. Anything that allows you to break your fast in Ramadan, that udhr or that reason allows you to also break your tatabu in the 60 days that you're meant to fast. طيب. As for the qada of a person who eats intentionally, we said that he needs to make up that 1 day, right? Or if a person intentionally misses 5 days in Ramadan, what is wajib upon them? Intentionally doesn't fast 5 days, they repent and they make up those 5 days. It is not a must that they fast them together. They can fast 2 together, 3 together, and so on. طيب. Then the Shaykh says, rahimahullah, if فإن لم يستطع, يعني if he's not able to free a slave and he's not able to fast 2 months in a row, فإن لم يستطع فإطعام 60 مسكينا, then he feeds 60 poor people. He feeds 60 poor people, i.e. 60 different individuals. He can't say, I'm going to feed the same person 60 times. He can't say, I'm going to feed the same person 60 times. It's not permissible. لأن the hadith says, 60 مسكينة. The adad is maqsood. The number of individuals is maqsood, intended, which is 60. طيب. 60. طيب. And then the Shaykh says, نعم. So the dalil for that is the hadith of the man that came to the Prophet ﷺ said, and he said, halaktu ya Rasulullah. I have been destroyed. I have destroyed them. I have destroyed myself and destroyed others. The Messenger ﷺ asked him what had happened. He informed him that he had intercourse with his wife. Then the Prophet ﷺ gave him this tartib. He told him, feed the poor person. If you're not able to feed the poor person, he's told him to free a slave. If you're not able to free a slave, then fast 2 months in a row. If you're not able to fast 2 months in a row, then what? Feed 60 people. Then feed 60 people. طيب. Then the last jumla, or the last part is فَإِن لَمْ يَجِدْ سَقَطَتْ عَنْهُ. فَإِن لَمْ يَجِدْ. If he's not able to fast, if he's not able to free a slave, and he's not able to fast 2 months in a row, and he's not able to feed 60 people, مثلا he doesn't have any wealth, he's not able to feed 60 people, then the Imam says, rahimahullah, فَإِن لَمْ يَجِدْ سَقَطَتْ عَنْهُ. Then the wajib is lifted upon him. Then the wajib is lifted upon him.
He doesn't have to do any of it.
Naam, that's what the Imam is telling us. So you don't have to do any of them. And that is based on wajibat, tasqud al-wajibat bil-ajz. If a person is not able to carry out the wajibat, things that are wajib, then it drops the responsibility of it. And that is found in the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ pardoned him after he said he's not able to free a slave or fast 2 months in a row or feed a poor person. He actually gave him something to feed his family. However, it can be said that if he finds the means to feed those 60 people within close proximity, within a month, within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe 2 months, then he should do that. Then he should pay for that kafara. He should expiate. Like, and if it takes him years or 8, 9, 6, 7 months, then that is a long period of time. So the wajib drops. طيب. نعم. Then the Shaykh says, rahimahullah, and now he's going to go into another mas'ala which is similar to this. فَإِنْ جَامَعَ وَلَمْ يُكَفِّرْ. Now he's talking about expiating. The person that has intercourse, what happened? What did we say his ruling is? He repeats that day. That's kafara. The kafara is what? The expiation is what? He has to free a slave if he's able to. If not, then fast 2 months in a row. If not, then feed 60 Muslims. If not that, then he's excused. If it's within, he's excused of feeding 60 people. Like, if he's able to do it within a month or 2, give or take, and in a close period of time, then he should. Now he's talking about if a person does intercourse twice without having expiated. So he says, فَإِنْ جَامَعَ, if he has intercourse with his wife, وَلَمْ يُكَفِّرْ, and he has not expiated, he has not done the kafara, حَتَّى جَامَعَ ثَانِيَةً, and then he does it again. He does another intercourse again. فَكَفَارَتُهُ وَاحِدَةً, then he only has one kafara to do. وَإِنْ كَفَّرَ, like if he does kafara, ثُمَّ جَامَعَ, and then he has intercourse, فَكَفَارَتُهُ ثَانِيَةً, then he has to do a second kafara. Surah Al-Mas'ala. There's a person by the name of Yusuf. On the first day of Ramadan, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, he had intercourse with his wife. He broke his fasting with intercourse. What is wajib upon him? The kafara. Before that, Yusuf, on the first of Ramadan, broke his fast by doing intercourse with his wife. Then, in the later part of the day, about 5 o'clock, he had another intercourse without obviously expiating anything. So he performed intercourse twice in one day. That comes under this. Or he performed intercourse on the first day, and obviously he hasn't done the kafara, he hasn't expiated, because he can't fast in 2 months, but he might obviously find a slave, but he hasn't found a slave. He broke his fast with intercourse on the first day. Then on the second day, he broke his fast again with intercourse. What do you think his punishment should be? The first one, Yusuf, day 1 of Ramadan, he broke his fast with intercourse. That's haram, sah? طيب. What does he have to do? He has to do kafara, sah? That's one kafara so far. طيب. What about if he does intercourse again? So that was at 10 o'clock in the morning. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, he has another intercourse. What should we do here? What should we tell him? And he says, listen, I've done this. I've done it at 10 o'clock and I've done it at 5 o'clock. What can I do? What do we give him? The fatwa. What do we say to him? One kafara is one kafara. Okay. Well, okay. طيب. So he hasn't done it. Go on. Now leave the next day alone for now. That one day. He done it twice in one day. Twice in one day, yeah. He only has to do it once. Okay. If he does it once in 2 days, the first kafara that he done at 10 o'clock, the intercourse, he has to do expiation for that. So that's a given fact. Why is he saying, what about if he does the expiation? Let's say he frees a slave at 11 o'clock. Intercourse at 10 o'clock, he frees a slave at 11 o'clock. Like, at 5 o'clock, he does another intercourse. Does he need to do another kafara or not? Why not?
Because هذا اليوم
فسد.
This day he has to make up for it when he broke the fast. He paid the kafara for the sin. He hasn't made it up. He still has to make it up. So it's not like we haven't got.
يعني فسد صومه في هذا اليوم.
We haven't got a proof to say that as soon as you pay the kafara, you resume your fast. No, you have to make that day for another day because that day is gone anyway.
Okay. صح, you're right. That's true. But the fuqaha, they say, لِحُرْمَةِ الزَّمَانِ, because of the sacredness of the time, he has to do another kafara. Because just because you've done it at 10 o'clock, it don't mean, okay, you've done it at 10 o'clock, you do your kafara. You're allowed to do it however many times you want in that day. Because it's haram for him to do it in the first place.
Okay, sorry, we discuss. Huh? It means, it makes sense. But is it the difference with the haram of redoing it today, even if you broke your fast anyway? You're taking the meat, really.
By doing it again.
You broke it and you're doing it
do it again. So that's, yeah.
That's a sin. But is this sin now?
Does it validate another kafara, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sah. The thing is, now, if he breaks it at 10 o'clock, his fasting is gone anyway. Okay? He needs to make that day again. But he needs to do kafara for that day. If he does intercourse again, okay, he is sinning, but he doesn't need to do another kafara because he wasn't fasting on that day. Although, as we shall see in a second, he still needs to refrain from eating and intercourse. He needs to refrain. That's called al-imsak, that we're going to see in a minute. So he only has to do that one kafara that he did at 10 o'clock. The 5 o'clock one, he is sinning, he's blameworthy, but there's no kafara. Right. If he does it on the day one, and he hasn't expiated, he hasn't freed a slave or anything, he broke his fast. And then day two, he does exactly the same thing. He breaks his fast with intercourse at 10 o'clock. He has to do another kafara for that specific day. Why? Because the fasting of the first of Ramadan is different to the second of Ramadan. 2 different days, 2 different ibadahs. So if he breaks his fast with intercourse on the first day, he needs to do the kafara. And if he does another day, the second day, he does another kafara. If he does it on the third day, that's another kafara. So he has to either free slaves or fast 60 days, however many that is, 120 or so, 180, 60. Or he has to feed 180 masakin. Because that's the highest level of sin, to break your fast 3 days in a row like that. Right. So that is, in summary, this mas'ala as it is. Is that understood? Right. What about if a person says, you know what, I want to break my fast with intercourse, but let me eat first, let me drink first, or eat first, and I've broken my fast, then I'm going to do intercourse. So technically, that person hasn't broken his fast with intercourse. He broke his fast with what? Food. And then he does intercourse. What would you say is the ruling for him? Yeah. His intention was that he can do intercourse.
If he says, well, I ate before, really my intention was to do that, but if it's not clear,
Ahsant. Excellent. Both excellent. If a person, we know of a person, if he's a person that does it all the time, and his dahig is that he always plays around the sharia, or he says it clearly. Mathalan, he says to his wife, listen, she's obviously finished her hayd at 12 o'clock. So she's not even fasting anyway. But he says to her, listen, 1 o'clock, She says, no, ittaqillah, you're fasting. And he goes, you know what? There you go, I've broken it now. What now? If he does that, right? So for that sort of person, we know he's done it he broke his fast in order to play around the sharia of Allah. For that person, it's wajib for him to do kafara. يُعَامَلُ بِنَقِيدِ قَصْدِهِ, they say. It's a qa'idah which is important. يُعَامَلُ بِنَقِيدِ قَصْدِهِ. He's treated according to his evil intention. طيب. Wallah, you'd be surprised what people would do. نعم. Then the Imam says, rahimahullah, وكل من لزمه الإمساك في رمضان فجامع فعليه كفارة. This is the next masala which is very important. وكل من لزمه الإمساك, and every person who is wajib for him to abstain from or refrain from eating في رمضان, during Ramadan, فجامع, and then he has intercourse, فعليه كفارة, then upon him is kafara as well. he must do the kafara of freeing a slave or fasting 2 months in a row or freeing a slave. Surah al-Mas'alah. If a person, who is the Imam referring to? كُلُّ مَنْ لَزِمَهُ الْإِمْسَاكِ. Who is it binding upon him to refrain from eating? There's a difference between al-imsak, man yajibu alayhi al-imsak wa man yajibu alayhi as-sawm. There's a difference between who it's wajib for him to fast and who it's wajib for him to refrain from eating. مثلا, a musafir, a person is traveling. We're talking about what is in the matan. A person is traveling, he comes back home after traveling for the first part of the day. He comes home at 3 p.m. He's not fasting, is he? Because earlier on he broke his fast because he was traveling, and it was a legislated reason, valid reason. He comes home at 3 o'clock. Qadarullah, it just so happens that his wife finished her hayd at 12 o'clock and she had her ghusl and she's prayed dhuhr. Now you've got two people who are not fasting. The scholars, they say, يجب عليهم الإمساك, is upon them to refrain from eating, لكن لا يجب عليهم الصيام. Siyam is not wajib upon them. Does anyone know the difference? And imsak meaning these people, the one that comes home early from his traveling, and the woman that finishes her hayd at 12 o'clock, they refrain from eating due to the sacredness of the time, due to the sacredness of Ramadan. So they refrain from eating until iftar. That is the mawqif of that is what the Imam is referring to now. That is a person who is justified for him to refrain from eating. Who is he referring to when he's saying al-imsak, a person who is told to refrain from eating? A person who had a valid excuse, but that valid excuse is no longer there. The example, the traveler that comes home, or the person that gets better after midday, or the woman that finishes her hayd, upon them is that they refrain from eating. That's the madhab. So that is who he's referring to when he says وَكُلُّ مَنْ لَزِمَهُ الْإِمْسَاكُ فِي رَمَضَانَ فَجَامَعَ. So the Surah Al-Mas'ala is that traveler who comes back home, he's allowed to have intercourse, he has to refrain from eating, he's saying. But if he does intercourse with his wife, then he has to do kafara, according to the Imam. So before going into that, I want you to understand the matan faqat. The matan, what the Imam is saying. That is who he's referring to. Is that understood? Do you want me to repeat it? Either yes or no. It's important to understand. That's who is being referred to. Lakin the other opinion is that if a person who had a legitimate reason to break his fast during the first part of the day, then it is not binding upon him to refrain from eating and drinking and doing all of the other things that the person that is not fasting does. So the one that came back home at 3 o'clock, he can carry on eating. He can have his dinner, he can have his lunch, whatever. He can have intercourse if his wife is also not fasting, because it's not wajib for him to fast. Likewise, if a person is very ill, like at 2 o'clock he took a medicine and they're a lot better, khalas, that rest of the part, they don't have to fast. That's why Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, he said, "Man akala awwal an-nahari falyakul akhirahu." Whoever eats in the first part of the day, let him carry on eating in the second part of the day. However, there are two things that we need to differentiate between here. وجود الشرط أثناء الصوم أثناء اليوم. وجود الشرط, finding the condition for siyam, for fasting to be wajib. Finding the condition, or the condition being met during the day. That's the first thing. And the second is irtifa'ul mani', the prevention, the thing that was preventing you from fasting being removed. The first one was what? What was the first one I just said? The wujud al-shart, finding the condition. Okay, for example, if a person accepts Islam at midday in Ramadan, on the first of Ramadan he says Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah at midday, what do we say to him? Start your fast right now, there and then. Why? لأنه وجد الشرط, the condition has been found. The condition of fasting, Islam. Now there and then it is wajib for him to hold, to fast from that day. And he doesn't need to make the first part up. Likewise, مثلا, let's say a young person reaches puberty at midday. That's possible. He has a wet dream midday and he has reached puberty. For that person, he starts his fasting there and then. That person, that young person who reaches puberty during the day of Ramadan, he starts his fasting there and then. Why is that? Because the condition of bulugh, the condition of puberty has been met. So there's a difference between the condition being present, because from the moment it becomes wajib on you, you have to start what? Applying that wajib, the obligation. However, the second thing that I mentioned was iktifa'ul mani'. The thing that prevented you from fasting is lifted. For example, a traveler fasting the early part of the day. What prevented him from fasting? Traveling. If he comes back at 3 p.m., he comes home, that reason that allowed him to break his fast, is it still there or has it been removed? It's gone. Also, the woman that starts her day with the hayd, she's got her hayd and she finishes at, let's say, 1 o'clock. She has her ghusl and she prays duhur. What prevented her from fasting the first part of the day? Hayd, her menses. So that is the meaning of iktifa'ul mani', the prevention being lifted. In that case, that person doesn't need to hold for the rest of the day. They can eat and they can drink because they had a valid reason to break their fast in the early part of the day, and that valid reason carries on with them during the end of the day. So they can eat as much as they want.
No jima.
حتى جماع they're allowed, because it's not wajib upon them to abstain. Al-imsak la yajib alayhim. So even in jima', مثلا, the man comes home at 3 o'clock. He's on his way. When he gets to Houston, he asks his wife, have you prayed dhuhr yet? Obviously, she was on hayd at the first part. She goes, yeah, I've just prayed dhuhr. He goes, right, I'm coming now. I'm traveling. He's come back from his journey. He's now not traveling. And obviously, she's waiting because she finished her hayd at 1 o'clock. He's home. She finished her hayd. He finished her traveling. They're both halal for each other during that time. They can both do jima'. Is that understood?
Yeah, at the beginning, didn't we say that was not understood from the beginning, or maybe I misunderstood?
What was the beginning? What did we say? الإمساك. فجامع فعليه كفارة. فجامع فعليه كفارة.
I understood that the example was, if he started the safar, he's there, he doesn't have to make siyam. He comes back before the end of the day.
Now that's according to what we said, and that's the stronger opinion. Like in the Imam is saying, it is wajib for him to do imsak. So if he's traveling first part of the day and he comes home, he still has to refrain from food, eating, drinking, and jima'.
While traveling or after coming?
No, after coming home.
Oh, this is the Imam saying.
Yeah, this is the matan.
Okay. And what you just explained now is the other side.
The other side, where it's permissible, if he comes back from traveling, because he had a valid reason at the early part of the day, then that it's okay. He's not fasting technically. The one that comes, the Imam is saying, na'am, but why? لأن حرمة الزمان. The zaman is sacred. The time of Ramadan is a sacred time. It's not a time where everyone can just eat and drink. Like, نعم.
وقل رب زدني